Nothing like a little technical difficulty on a Friday afternoon. We're a few minutes late, but we are here and we are live. Welcome, Christy Stutzman.
Yay! Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So glad to have you. We're gonna talk about a topic today that I rarely talk about, and that's part of what we're going to talk about. Is why I rarely talk about it. It's politics, and you have a great title of the book, the cost, the I got to say it right.
Yeah.
The spiritual price of political silence. Guilty as charged. So I want to be told why this is not good for me, because I know that it's not. But so you've been involved in politics for, it looks like, 20 years. You know what's happening, what's really going on. So tell me why this is such an important topic for you.
Well, I think we can all relate to the fact that I have a chapter in my book. It's called I Don't Do Politics. And I think we have all probably said that at one point or another, especially during campaign season, because it's just so ugly and can get nasty and not fun. And we don't like any of that. And so that's kind of been something that I've seen just for the last 20 years of people just really getting turned off, from all the ugliness. And having been involved and never planning to be really as involved as we got, I was able to go from fine arts teacher and composer and, musician to entering the world of politics and kind of being like this person who loves history, loves America, very patriotic, but didn't like the ugliness and not the greatest debater, and being involved. And so I heard a lot from my friends and family and people that I would speak to about it. And they would say, it just looks so overwhelming. It looks scary. It looks ugly. I mean, where do I start? How do I get involved? And I learned that, we are so blessed here in this country because of the sacrifices that were made by others. And we have not just a legacy, but a birthright to be involved. And so what a great opportunity in this little window of time in the, in the history, in the annals of history, that we actually have to be able to choose our leaders and make a difference. But it just has become so expensive. It's become divisive, and it really has been a climate of intimidating people of faith, especially from speaking out and being bold. And so I really wanted to give us tools to be able to use to combat that, and found many reasons as to why we should be involved.
So you ran a campaign, you held an office. What would you say to people that think, man, I'd like to do that, but gosh, I don't have the money, I don't have the political clout, I don't have the, the stamina to put my family through that? You've done that. What would you say to people that have thought, man, I could really make a difference, but no thanks?
Well, I'd say, first of all, pray long and hard about it. It's not an easy thing, and it sometimes can be stressful, and so you have to make sure that everybody,
Sometimes.
Yeah, it depends on, the race, but even now down to school board and county council, I mean, those can get divisive too. So, you're talking about dealing with your neighbors, your local community people. And so it can get pretty personal too. So you really need to pray about it and make sure that everybody in your family is on board, that they all have a piece about it, that you should at least try. And my husband and I have made a point never to pray that God help me win. We've just always prayed, Lord, if it's your will, I'm going to put myself out there. I'm going to be willing. And if it's not your will, then close the door and be open to either one. Don't think so much that you have to win and the world is burning, that, it can't go on without you. It really can. And that's the beauty of our system. Someone gave us some really good advice when my husband first ran for state rep when he was 26 years old. An older man looked at him and he said, just remember, if you win this, that this title doesn't belong to you, it belongs to the people, and that you are a temporary steward of that title. Someone had it before you and someone's going to have it after you. So just be a good steward while you have it. And that's the approach I would take.
So let's say someone does that and they get in and they go in with noble causes. I've known many people that have done this. You have
Yeah.
too. They go in with noble causes. They're going to stay true to their faith. They're going to stay true to their family. But because of the system that is already so ingrained in corruption, it's
Mhm.
so ingrained in deceit and deception that you can't go in there and remain noble. And I mean, you have to begin to understand the system is what it is, and one person can't change it.
Right.
What is someone to do about the knowledge of walking into something that huge?
Yeah, it is huge, especially when you get on the state level and then the federal level. It gets really big. Now, commissioners, in Indiana, we have 3 commissioners per county, so that's usually a pretty easy, collaboration with your fellow. But when you're talking like 435 members of Congress, yeah, you're probably not going to arrive and, change the whole world immediately. But what you can do is you can set the boundaries of what you stand for and your the things that you will never compromise on immediately. You can establish it and say, I am pro-life. I am
Right.
free speech. I am a Christian. Make sure that you establish that, and it's really, it's really a bold move to do that because then you're going to be targeted. But at least you've set the boundaries and said, this is who I am and this is what I stand for. Don't even bother lobbying me if you're pro-choice. I am pro-life. I always will be. Don't even talk about it. So there's things like that you can do. But the other thing you have to be aware of is the fact that this is a consensus building system that we're in. And so it creates a situation where you have to develop relationships and you have to work at issues. I was the original author of the Protect Women's Sports Bill in Indiana. Well, this was back in the day when it wasn't a big deal. Nothing had really been happening in America in that regard. But I saw it in Switzerland. I saw it in Sweden. I saw it in England. And I saw we were 20 years behind them, but it was coming. And so
Wow.
therefore I was trying to build a case to my fellow legislators and say, hey guys, before this happens here, let's put something in place to protect our girls. Well, it took me 2 years of conversations in order to develop a coalition of people who were going to co-sign on to that bill and they were going to support it. So it is a slow moving process. If you're a business owner, it can be frustrating because you're used to getting things done and, taking care of business. And in Congress and also in the legislature, it can be a little bit slower. But as far as your Christian beliefs and your values and your moral, non-negotiables, those things have to be set early on. And you also have to be willing, hold that title lightly. Don't allow yourself to be identified as I'm state representative so-and-so. I'm
Right.
congressperson so-and-so. That is not who you are. Know who you are before you go in there so that when you're standing up to them and to the leadership and you say, I'm sorry, I can't go along with this. And you say it kindly and nicely, but I'm sorry, I can't. When they threaten you and say, well, we're going to come after you, we're going to take you out. That's not a threat to you because it's in God's hands. So stand firmly and boldly in what you believe and don't allow the threats to intimidate you and don't cling so tightly to that title that that's who you identify as.
So, to the believer that says, it's not the donkey or the elephant, it's the lamb.
Yeah.
I don't care. I've lost hope in the whole political system. There's a lot of people that are there.
Yeah. Yep.
Why is this still important for people like you or people like me? I'm in Louisiana, to get involved when, you feel like it's so broken, it's never going to be fixed. We're over as a country,
Yeah.
What do you say to people that think, okay, I'm just going to put my hope in the Lord and put my faith in Him? Well,
Right.
where is that short-sighted into thinking?
Well, I think what was encouraging to me as I did the research for this book was that our founding fathers put a government in place and tools in place with a lot of wisdom to allow people of moral conviction, and I call them people of faith across this country, to be involved and have a seat at the table and have a say in the guidance and the moral compass of our country. So they made 2 assumptions. The first assumption was that people of faith would always be involved because they knew that our system of government would not survive in any other way. No matter what system of government they gave us, without that moral clarity, it wasn't going to survive. Second of all, they gave it to us because they really felt like, out of necessity and personal preservation, and for those, for our children and grandchildren, that we would want to have a seat at the table in guiding the discussion. But the other thing that's really poignant right now in today's culture is the fact that if we aren't at the table, somebody else will be. And they will grab those reins of power and they will direct it in a wrong direction. And we only have ourselves to blame because we are self-governing. One of the beautiful things of our system of government, too, is that we are able to look at societal wrongs and address them and correct them. And you've seen that over the history of America. You have seen societal wrongs be addressed and be fixed and corrected with the right people in place. And that's the key. You have to get right people with right motivation sitting there at the table, guiding the discussions. And I have seen this behind the scenes. I've watched my husband do it. I've watched leaders do it over and over again, where they're doing the hard work of government. And that is bringing people together, not in front of the cameras, not for some type of clickbait. They're actually sitting in a room talking through difficult issues and trying to find solutions. And it's a beautiful thing to see, but you just don't have the TV cameras there covering that, because that is where the sausage is made. It's where you're debating and going back and forth, and you're coming to an agreement, and you're saying, okay, this is where I'm not going to compromise, but this is where I can. So let's come together here. It's that type of approach. So it's important.
And I know there's a lot of things that happen that are good, because, I know there's prayer Bible studies and there's prayer meetings, and I know there's things that are never going to make the news. And unfortunately, people don't see that. To get,
Right.
that's a fresh wind of hope that people, if people knew that, would feel better. But what do you say to the people that say our country was founded in hatred? There's so much mishistory and miscommunication that, you have a lot of people. I don't think it's just young people. I think it's, people that don't understand history, that want to make it out that our country doesn't deserve to be, one nation under God and all these great things, because we're a bad nation and we took over people and we killed the Indians and all the things. What do you say to people who have that attitude and they're not willing to dig deep and to find out the facts? Because we got a lot of people willing to say a lot of things, but not very little of it is based in fact.
Yeah. Well, I would encourage them to do a deep dive into history, really go back generations and centuries and study the process of history. Because when you arm yourself with information on the true facts of how history has, played out in front of us, not one nation has been perfect. Not one nation is completely innocent of wrongdoing, including ours. So we have to recognize the wrongs that were done. And we have to recognize the fact that we have a solution. We have a system in place where we can address it and we can fix that problem. But we also have to be aware that we have been inundated with an agenda which is targeting our young people. And I'm talking 100 years ago, we were targeted with this victim mentality, with this mentality of I will never overcome the past. And this is not a victorious mentality towards life. I mean, my family, when I look at my family tree, I mean, every color of the rainbow is there. It is a beautiful, I call myself an American mutt. When you look at me, you would never know what my family looks like. But we shouldn't assume by looking at someone who their relatives were or who their ancestors were. There are terrible stories in my family, and there are beautiful stories in my family. Mm-hmm. And that's what makes this country so beautiful, is that we are a melting pot of so many different things. And somehow we have found a way to be blessed by God, because we have really focused on being salt and light around the world. I've traveled around the world on diplomatic missions. And one of the things we kept hearing over and over from people, leaders in other countries, and people who are guides, for us, they would say, just want to thank America for all of the good you've done. You've established a school over here. You've established this hospital. You've brought us disaster relief. You've given us educational, all these things that we've done, mission work. Mm-hmm. But please don't stop. And I have to ask myself, why are they asking me, please don't stop? They're watching us. They're watching us because we've led the way and bringing people together in a unique way from various backgrounds, denominations, just ethnicities. And it's a beautiful thing. So when we focus on the bad, we're going to find the bad. But let's realize that there's bad and good. Let's focus on the future and be unified about that.
Yeah, I agree with that so much. I did not grow up. I did not grow up with a great foundational knowledge of history. So a lot of people really didn't.
Right.
My husband and my son are history buffs, so I'll always say, "What about this war? And what about that war? And who did this and who did that?" So
yeah.
people like me feel like I'm behind the 8 ball here. I don't have time. I'm not at the age and stage that I'm going to dig and read a bunch of history books. But what can somebody like me do now and say, okay, I don't know everything that happened, but I'm healthy, I'm passionate, I'm a patriot. What's something that I can do without looking at it and saying it's a lost cause? Say, oh, but I can do what?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll just reference my book. There's, I kind of in the beginning, there's like a refresher course on America's Judeo-Christian founding. And it was a beautiful thing to study that because you are reminded of all the miracles and all the people of faith who stepped forward and made huge sacrifices and saw themselves actually as stepping stones. They didn't think that they would see the reality of their hopes and dreams and their vision for this country in their lifetime. And it really is hard to think of yourself as a stepping stone. And I'm telling people now, we almost need to be prepared to think of ourselves as stepping stones again. I don't think we're at a crossroads. I think we're at a cliff and we're hanging over the cliff. And so when we're at a cliff, we're going to have to allow someone else to climb over us, right? We're going to have to allow someone else to step on us. We have to lay the foundation for someone to do that. We have to be willing to say, I'm going to start something now and hope that you can build on it and pull us back from the brink. So that's where we're at right now. And I think what everybody can do is I would encourage everyone to look at their own heart. Everybody can, they complain about the culture, right? The culture of Washington, the culture of Hollywood, the culture in general. Well, where does the culture happen? Well, it starts in our hearts. So look at the culture of your own heart first. Get that right. They always tell you on a plane, put your mask on first before you help other people, right? So you got to look at your own culture. Look at the culture in your home. Are you creating curiosity about, new things, about facts, about really digging down and finding truth? What type of culture are you creating? And then also in your community, in your local school, in your church, in your business, what is the culture you're creating? Are you creating an open dialogue or a very limited dialogue? So make sure that you're open to hearing all, things, but also arm yourself with information to be able to share what you believe and why you believe it. So that's where we start. But we also start by looking at our hands and going, okay, what tools do I have in my hand to make a difference? I know a lady she does a great job of entertaining. She has entertained eventual Congress people, in her home when they were running for state rep. How did she do that? She did a beautiful spread of desserts and she had coffees and she had finger foods and she invited her neighbors and she said, come on in, let's hear this guy speak when he's running for county council. And as you do that, you're going to create a rapport and a relationship with people who, as they move up the political ladder, they will know who you are. And when you call them on their cell phone, which you'll probably have after that, they'll know who you are and you'll be speaking for thousands of people as you share a concern.
Yeah. I like to say you got to do the work to get the work done. And so, you've got cancel culture and you've got, people being silenced. So many people are scared to say, I'm for this candidate or that candidate because they're going to potentially get shut down. So what do you say to that part of it? Because it's really real.
It is very real. Yeah. And it's been going on for several decades in our country, this intimidation. They're just getting bolder about it. And I think it's becoming in vogue, to try to cancel someone. And I think we're seeing the repercussions of that. Even in Hollywood, we have some writers, producers, big names, who are pushing back against this agenda. And so it is definitely something we need to be aware of. But I say, somebody asked me the other day, what would you say to the church if you could put it on a billboard? And my answer was, arise, O Church of God, and put your armor on. It was meant to be worn and used. And we need to know where to find that armor of God, and we need to be able to put it on, and we need to be bold for what we believe in. And I think, sometimes we're not as bold as we should be because we're not sure about what we believe and why we believe it. So we have to arm ourselves with truth. I was reading a story about my 7 times great grandmother. She was an old Quaker lady, and she was just always ministering to the sick and the needy and the poor. And during the winter of Valley Forge, her first cousin, General Anthony Wayne, encamped on her farm near Valley Forge. And so she ministered to the soldiers there. But on her deathbed, this was after the Revolution, she was surrounded by her family, and she sat up with one last breath, and she looked at them and she said, "Be valiant for truth." And as I read that, I thought, what else should we be valiant for? I mean, so many people are telling us it's my truth and you have your truth and he has his truth. But I truly believe there is truth, God's truth.
Yeah.
And we have to be bold for that. So we should not be intimidated about, from speaking up, and also choosing candidates that we believe in. When we know a candidate and we know their reputation and their testimony, don't be afraid to get behind them boldly. And sometimes all it takes is putting a sign in your yard. You could be intimidated by doing that. Take that bold step and put that sign in your lawn to put their neck out and risk their reputation by running.
So what do you say to the people that say our country wasn't founded on Christian principles, and that separation of church and state meant for people not to have to dictate a religion? I mean, those are 2 big topics, but just touch on those a little bit. We were founded on a Christian heritage. Tell us, just confirm that with a couple of facts.
Yeah, I would encourage people to go to wallbuilders.com. They have huge resources of information about our founding. But all of the letters that I have read from the founding fathers, including Thomas Jefferson's, where he mentions that phrase, the separation of church and state, have really either been hidden or misinterpreted by people on purpose who have an agenda trying to get rid of our Judeo-Christian founding and trying to hide or mask the true motivations of those who were founding it. And they were from a variety of backgrounds. I mean, they didn't all agree on theology, but they did agree on right versus wrong, truth versus, error, good versus evil. They agreed on all that. And so they came together and they established this government. Now, when you talk about separation of church and state, that was a great concern of the colonies, simply because right before the Revolution, there had been some great concern about persecution of people who were not adhering to the colony-approved state church, basically, is what it was. So you had an official government church, and if you didn't go to that church, let's say, in Virginia, there were some Baptists who were preaching differently than what the established church was preaching, they were jailed. I mean, we had Patrick Henry defending them in court because they were preaching what their conscience told them to preach. So the concern with the colonists as they established their government was that, their great-grandparents or great-great-grandparents had come to the shores in the 1600s seeking religious asylum. Quakers, Puritans, Pilgrims, all these people who had been, just harried out of Europe because of religious persecution, Mennonites, Amish. So they're all coming here seeking just a place to follow their conscience and to follow God. So they were concerned that eventually the government could establish a state church and they would be in the same situation that they had been. Thomas Jefferson was reassuring them, no, that will not happen. And they said, now, wait a minute, we don't see that in the Constitution. That's where we get the Bill of Rights. So when people say this country was not founded, it wasn't a Christian country from the beginning, whatever. If you read those letters from John Adams, from Thomas Jefferson, from George Washington, I just read one from Carrollton. He signed the Constitution, and it was a beautiful testimony of his belief in Jesus Christ. Now, they did not want to establish a certain church, or approve of a certain religion from the governmental point of view because they wanted freedom of religion. But it was never intended that Christians should not be involved in government. In fact, it was the exact opposite. They were counting on that. They were counting on people of faith being involved, or else they said it wouldn't work and it wouldn't last.
Yeah. Yeah, and freedom of religion, not freedom from
Not from religion.
which is a very different thing. So, and then I want to ask one more question and then get to your book, because I know your book is a resource for people that are asking these very questions.
Right.
So doing the work and having an educated opinion so that you can cast an educated vote is on everyone to do. You know, you need to know what, like you said, what your issues are: pro-life, protection of the church, and religious freedom, and things like that are very important. Where do you find people really wrestle with where to find factual news? Because as you know, there's so much of it that you can't really trust any of it. So what do you say to someone to get information about real facts as we move closer to this election season?
Yeah, it is. You're right. It is a very big problem. We just went through that in Indiana here with our primary. Every ad that you saw was normally paid for by some super PAC from out of our state. So what we have to be vigilant about is where we get our information. When you see ads, against a certain candidate or for a certain candidate, mark who it's paid for by. And go to their website, do some research on them, and find out who they are. And if it's by the candidate, they're required to say, "I paid for this myself." So you know that they're approving the words that are in that ad. But there's other ads that come across the airwaves that, they're by super PACs who can raise unlimited amounts of money and go after a candidate or support a candidate. And, you really have to do your research. So I would say, first of all, pay attention to the disclaimers. Who is paying for the messaging that you're getting? The other thing is, in my book, I provide reliable resources, and I've also provided it on my website, which is booksbychristy.org. And if you sign up for our email, you can download reliable resources. And it's just like 3 pages of resources with a little blurb about what they're good at, what their specialty is, just kind of a little information on each one. And then you can, look it up yourself. But anymore, we really have to do our due diligence to research even the news articles that are coming out and the news resources. A lot of times they're skewed one way or the other, and they're not presenting the whole story. And the best way, really, when you're going to, vote for someone, you can do this easier on the local level than the federal level. But on the local level, look at their websites, but also reach out to them directly. Email their staffers, their campaign managers. Offer to host a reception. Go to a town hall where they're speaking. But I would also recommend to people to look at who they associate with. Who are they touting as their friends? Are they saying, I was part of this pregnancy resource center? We'll call the pregnancy resource center. Have you ever heard of so-and-so? What have they done for you? How have they helped you? If they're saying they're pro Second Amendment, we'll look up their record. Do they have a record on that? Where do they stand on it? So it's up to us, we the people. We were talking about this the other day with all the money in politics right now. It's really hard to kind of filter through, because they will poll us and they will say what we want to hear instead of really telling us the actual connection. So what I started doing was saying, okay, who is this group? Who started this group? And who do they associate with? Because that'll tell you a lot, much more than the talking points that they give you on a commercial.
Yeah, so true. And so many of the poll questions are manipulative that, you just can't really, it's like voting for the things that are, bills, yay or nay. It's like, okay, I'm not going to vote for anything if I can't read the question and understand what it says.
Exactly. Well, there's such a thing as now, it's called a push poll, right? Yeah. So they'll call you and say they're doing a survey. And then they say, but if you knew that so-and-so did this and this and this, would you be more likely or less likely? And it's so funny, because my husband got one the other day, and he said, now, what if I told you that, if I said this, would you ask me a question about another candidate in that race, or is this only on this candidate? And they said, oh, only for this one. So it was obvious they're trying to hurt that person by doing a survey. So really be aware of that.
So your book is a resource. Your book is, you're a historian. You've held an office. Your husband has an office now. What is your husband now? I know is he still a state rep?
No, he's actually the primary. He just won the primary, and he is the Republican nominee for Congress for our district.
Wow. So, I mean, you're in the thick of it. You
Oh
know the
yes, we've
system.
just experienced $3 million of attack ads. So
Oh, yeah, I bet you have. So, yeah. So, but your book is a resource for people to
right.
answer a lot of these questions. So, if people get your book, what are they going to find in it that would be helpful to prepare them for an educated vote?
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, I am not like I love books, but I'm not like a bookworm per se. And I think a lot of people are that way as well.
Yep.
So I tried to make the chapter short because when I read a chapter, I feel accomplished, right? So I made the
Yep.
chapters pretty short
Yeah.
and then broke it up into sections, with titles. So you know what that section's about. But the first third of it is really just kind of a refresher course, on America's history, on the facts, and hopefully with the quotes and the stories that I give in there, it whets your appetite to study more. And that's where I would encourage everybody to go to Wall Builders and other really good resources for American history. But then the second part of the book talks about kind of the craziness that we have in our world right now. I mean, we have so much insanity happening where the world just seems like it's lost its mind over certain just common sense things. So you start wondering, well, where did this come from? What I was amazed at as I did my research was that we were targeted over 100 years ago by cultural Marxists who came to this country, targeted academia, started writing curriculum, articles, they started teaching in our upper echelons of higher learning, and they started targeting the next generation. And this was all on purpose. Antonio Gramsci is a socialist who was in jail in Italy after some failed attempts at socialism there. And he was talking about, well, the next time we try this, their utopia is always, just around the corner. So next time we try this, I think we need to target the children first, because once they're a certain age, it's almost too late, especially in America. So that's what they did. But I think the church was asleep at the wheel. We weren't ready for that. We weren't ready to combat it. We hadn't armed ourselves to be able to push back on this new progressive idea. And really what it's based on, I read this 400-page book, studying for this, to write this book. And after reading it, it's called The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self. I would highly recommend it. But what it basically boils down to is one Bible verse, and that is, the fool hath said in his heart, there is no God. And when you decide that there is no God, when you are a humanist, atheist type of mentality, then you are trying to get rid of anything that has any semblance of authority, whether it is a father in the home, whether it's parents in the home, whether it's teachers, law enforcement, government, you name it. And that's why we're seeing anarchy in our world today and in our streets and our cities. That's where it's coming from, because they are bereft of actual solid truth and purpose in life, right? So it becomes this big conglomeration of the power brokers at the top and the little guy at the bottom, and the people at the top know better. The elite know better than everybody else how to rule their lives. Mm-hmm. So that I go into that. And then the last part is, okay, now that we know all this, where do we start? How do we turn this thing around? We're talking on the local level. And one of the main points that I would encourage people to just remember after this conversation and as they read the book, if you get involved on a school board level, on a county level, what you're doing is you're vetting candidates who might not be dealing with moral issues, right? They might not be dealing with free speech issues or, pro-life issues or something. But if they are the president of the school board and they decide to run for state rep, guess what? They will be dealing with it then. So vet them early and make sure that their worldview aligns with yours. And then as they move up, in the system, you can hold them accountable. And you also know that you vetted them, and you can say, hey, you know what? I thought this is who you were. What happened? I can't support you anymore if you're not going to stand for this. You have an in with them because you were there from the beginning. And then I also provide at the end excerpts from the different platforms, Republican platform, Democrat platform, links to the other platforms, because I feel like it's only fair that we all decide where we come down, ourselves. I'm not promoting one party over the other. All the parties have problems. So we really need to figure out for ourselves and our own conscience where we come down on the issues.
So you said something that 100 years ago, when this Marxism began to creep in, the churches were asleep at the wheel.
Yeah.
Are they still asleep at the wheel?
I see pockets of the church and people of faith starting to wake up. And one of the catalysts to that, I believe, was COVID. So as we were shut, our churches were shut down, our schools were shut down. We started seeing the curriculums that were taught to our children, when they were online, studying. But I think it was a wake up call. It's just kind of like that proverbial frog in the boiling water. When you all of a sudden turn the heat up real hot, the frog realizes, oh, this is hot, and wants to jump out. And I think that's we're seeing like pockets of spiritual renewal happening, whether it's in the University of Alabama, Georgia, out west, in the Midwest. We're seeing college campuses, some revivals on college campuses. We're seeing prayer groups popping up. We're seeing moms and dads showing up at state houses and having prayer rallies. I think this is all a result of the fear that we have in our hearts, seeing how quickly our freedoms can be taken from us under the guise of, a healthcare scare. So I do believe that there's hope, and I think that there's definitely work to do, but I think people are starting to wake up. And when I talk about the turn of the century, where the church was asleep at the wheel, I really feel like we were kind of lulled into this security, especially after World War II. We were ready to just enjoy life, right? And have a good life, and not all these wars and stuff. And then, Vietnam happened, and that was, during that time, right before Vietnam, is where we were targeted. And so it was very tenuous. And we started seeing the outplaying of this progressive mentality and the cultural Marxism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, so, is that your dog barking or mine? I hear somebody's dog barking.
Yes, it's mine. Sorry.
Okay. I have dogs too. So here's what I would say to people. Don't give up, don't disengage.
Right.
And don't give up on our system, because our system is a good system. Thank God our founding fathers saw this coming and knew how to put political protections in place. And thank God they did.
Right.
And your book is a great resource for anyone that feels like they need a crash course. And, oh my gosh, what do I do? How do I get involved? Yeah. It's a really good, you've got resources in there for people, but we can't give up now. We can't give in now. We can't put our head in the sand and say, okay, I give up. I don't want, I just trust God. Okay, good. Trust God. But in the meantime, he put you here on this earth right now for a time such as this, however you want to put it, to do good works. And what is the good works? We have to save our country. We can't sit around and complain about it. We got to get involved. And I'm speaking to myself here. I'm gonna read your book, get involved, and do something with my energy and my faith and my vitality. Because I can go to church on Sunday, but I can't sit around and say, oh my gosh, the country's going to hell in a handbasket, without me doing something to stop it. So that's all for all.
Yeah. And even if it means just sending a postcard with a prayer on it to one of your elected officials on a regular basis, that is making a difference. We had a lady do that for us for several years when my husband was in elected office. And I looked forward to those postcards. I didn't know when they were coming, but when they came, I put it on my nightstand and I read it over and over and over again. That is having an influence on someone. It's a reminder to someone who is in the arena that they're not alone, and that people are praying for them, even if it means sending an email or signing a petition, or walking in a parade with the person that I know people that were walking for our local commissioner in a parade. Why? Because they knew him and they believed in him, and that was their part. Everyone can have a part, even if it's showing up to just your school board meetings and just watching it happen. I think it will take the intimidation factor out if you go and you just watch and you observe it. Because if you run a business meeting, if you run your own business, it's not as intimidating when you go to some of these meetings and you see, oh, well, that wasn't that hard. Goodness, I could do something like that. All of a sudden you start realizing that you have skills you didn't really know applied to a government situation.
Yeah. And you're not quite empty nesting yet, but I am. I have, grandkids. I could still be active in, my grandkids' education.
Yes.
they're not where they can go to a private school. So, there's always a place I can get involved and go to a school board meeting.
Yeah.
And, while my daughter's busy raising kids, I can do that for that school that she's in. So I do think that it's getting our heads, it's putting our boxing gloves on and saying, I'm
Yeah.
going to get involved in something and figure
Yeah.
out what that's. Pray about it, but don't just sit back and expect God to do all the work. When He's fill the earth with people, then He expects to do His work. So we got a role to play.
That's right. Work till he comes, and do the best you
Thank
can to make a difference where you're planted. You start in your Judea and Samaria and then go out to the uttermost parts of the world. So start in your little corner and make sure that's in good hands. And I had someone ask me the other day, well, look at Governor DeSantis in Florida. He just passed this bill that all these public schools should have a chaplain. And now they have the Satanic Temple, wanting to have, a say in the chaplains. And they said, what do you do about that? I said, well, you have a leader who's trying to do something positive and something good. Then it's up to the community to make sure that their community and their school is in good hands as well. So you can't just leave it up to the governors. It's up to us, we the people, and it always has been.
We the people, and we want to be seen as we the people, but we got to act like we the people. And so, I mean, we've got to rise up. I do think people are waking up. I do think people are getting mad. I do think people are seeing, what happens. It's unfair, but don't just sit home with that. Go out and do something with that. So
yeah,
we can talk all day, but your book, we're going to put that in the comments so that people can get that. That's a good way to start. You've got a lot of facts, you've got a lot of experience, and you understand the history of our country. And those are critical pieces of the puzzle to become an activist, even on a small scale. But I believe now is the time for us all to get involved. So thank you for your book. Thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for putting the research together to give an educated opinion, not opinion, an educated resource for people to be able to read and then do something with. So thank you for doing that.
Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Thanks for what you're doing.
Yeah, well, thank you. And we'll keep our eyes open and our ears open and put our boxing gloves on and get out in the ring and make the world a better place.
Let's do it.
Right. Well, you have a great weekend. Thank you so much for what you're doing, and Godspeed to you and your husband and all y'all are doing, and happy graduation coming up.
Thank you.
Have a great one.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank
Appreciate
you
it.
for watching, everybody.